Hey there. Do you dare? If you're into true crime, the paranormal, mysteries, and everything in between, check out Do You Dare? It's a podcast where siblings Emily and Kian Dare dive into the cases that fascinate and unsettle them. They take turns picking the stories, true crime, ghostly encounters, unsolved mysteries, and share all the details with each other and you. Plus, you'll hear the occasional cameo from Emily's dog Kylo and his squeaky toy. If you're looking for something intriguing, creepy, and a little bit fun, give Do You Dare a listen wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, come back next week if you dare.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Big urban cities pack a lot into their streets. A bakery that's been around long enough for regulars to claim that they've tried everything on the menu. A park where parents trade stories while their kids race from one end to another. A pizza place that somehow always has a line, even on a Tuesday afternoon. Skyscrapers that catch the sun like a gem above the city. Schools tucked into neighborhoods where everyone seems to know each other. Toronto fits that picture easily. It grew fast, and it kept growing, which means the old parts never really went away. Some of them sit right in the open, like cemeteries with markers so worn you have to lean in close to make out the date. Others sit a little further back, away from the sidewalks, like houses that haven't seen a family in decades. The kids snicker and sneer, pointing them out on their walks home, and the adults pretend they don't remember doing the same thing. And then there are places that you don't see unless you're already standing in them. Parts built before anyone thought that the city would stretch this far. The sections that were easily sealed up, rerouted, or forgotten when new projects came along. Toronto has more of these than most people realize. Old utility corridors, service routes from the early 1900s, passages carved out for some reason no one talks about anymore. Every so often, someone ends up in one of those places by accident. A wrong turn, a loose grate, a gap behind a building that doesn't look like much until you're already through it. And that's when you start to understand how much of Toronto exists under the surface and how easy it is to miss what's been sitting there for years. Because once you're down in those tunnels, you start to wonder what else might be down there with you. Laurie Goldstein had been a journalist for the Toronto Sun since shortly after its creation in 1971. He gradually worked his way up from reporter to columnist to even editor until his retirement in 2015, having a career for almost 40 years. And in 1979, he would run a story that would forever become cemented in Toronto's urban legends. That year, Goldstein took a trip to Cabbagetown. Why is it called Cabbagetown? Well, in the mid-1800s, the area of East Downtown Toronto became home to a large number of Irish immigrants, many of them fleeing famine overseas. These families were poor, newly arrived, and often living in overcrowded conditions. To supplement their food, residents planted cabbage and other vegetables in their front yards. And so, the wealthier Torontotarians began to refer to this neighborhood facetiously as Cabbagetown, and over the years, the name just kind of stuck. By the late 19th century, the name had become official, even as the area's reputation shifted from working class to neglected. In a small apartment, Goldstein met a couple, 51-year-old Ernest and Barbara, his wife. They asked that their names not be included in an article he was writing for fear of ridicule. They told him this very weird tale about something that Ernest had seen. The whole time, the pair are trying to convince Goldstein that Ernest was not drunk and was very, very sober when this event happened. The story goes that in the summer of 1978, Ernest was raising a small litter of kittens, and he notices that one is missing. So out he goes with a flashlight in search of the small cat. He ventures in between his apartment and the one beside it when he notices a small crevice near the bottom of the fire escape. He gets the idea that this would be the perfect hiding place for a kitten. In fact, he can already hear some noises coming from inside that area that sounds like some sort of an animal. Ernest climbs inside to check it out. Inside the crevice is a mouth to a passage beneath a toppled pile of concrete, and it's dark. If it wasn't for the flashlight, he wouldn't have been able to see his own hand in front of his face. He starts waving his flashlight beam in the dark in front of him. He only makes it about 10 feet inside when his beam hits something glowing. At first, Ernest isn't sure what he's looking at. He can't tell if it's a small doll or maybe even a raccoon, but whatever it is, it has glowing slanted orange eyes like a monkey's, and it's covered head to toe in slate gray fur. It stood there about 3 feet tall, looked to weigh about 30 pounds, and had a mouth full of menacing long, sharp teeth. Eyes that reflect in the dark usually belong to animals with tapetum lucidum. Cats have it, raccoons have it, dogs too. It's that layer in the eye that sends light back out, which is why their gaze can look bright when a flashlight hits it. The color of that reflected shifts depends on the species and the fur that surrounds the face, so it's easy to mistake one animal for another if you're only catching a quick look. A few groups aside, most primates don't have that feature because they're active during the day. For example, lemurs have it. Lorisiforms have it. And in nocturnal branches, the haplorhine family, you see it in species like owl monkeys. It's not uncommon, but it's rare. So it is really hard to say exactly what it was that Ernest saw. What's even more inconceivable is what Ernest heard next. The creature crouched low and hissed, "Go away, go away," before turning tail and running quickly further down the dark tunnel. And Ernest didn't stick around to see if the creature would come back. He ran out of there as fast as he could, trembling with fear the whole time. This article from The Sun is really the only thing that we have to go on. There haven't been any other major reports of an English-speaking, part monkey, part raccoon creature with glowing eyes that has been spotted in the underbelly of the city. But that doesn't mean that people didn't take this article seriously, which was published with an artist rendering of the creature. And of course, over the years, there have been many theories about what it was Ernest saw. A leading theory was that someone had an escaped pet monkey. In Toronto during the late 1970s, that wasn't impossible, but it also wasn't that simple either. Ontario didn't have a provincial ban on primate ownership, and the rules were left to individual municipals. Toronto's bylaws eventually prohibited all non-human primates, but that happened later. In the 1970s, someone could have kept a monkey if they found a seller and didn't draw attention to themselves. Urban legends about escaped exotic pets aren't unique to Toronto. New York has some of the most famous examples. The alligator in the sewer stories. These tales started circulating in the 1920s and 1930s, usually tied to the idea that a tourist brought home a baby alligator from Florida and then dumped them when they got too big. The story grew from there, with reports from sewer workers spotting reptiles in the streets, small alligators having been found in New York over the years, usually abandoned pets. But there's no evidence of a breeding population living underground. The sewers are too cold and too contaminated for long-term survival. Despite this, the urban legend still holds strong and has become part of the city's identity. Toronto in the late 1970s had a growing unhoused population, especially around the downtown core. The city was dealing with rising rent, aging rooming houses, and a shortage of affordable units. People who couldn't keep stable place often moved between shelters, church basements, and whatever corners of the city felt safe enough to sleep. Some of them stayed near the Don Valley. Others used service corridors, loading bays, and the older parts of the transit system to get out of the weather. And it's entirely possible that someone had made a home in one of those old tunnel systems beneath the city. So could it have been a homeless man that Ernest encountered? If they had hair long enough and uneven enough, and a beard that was matted and gray, in a dim tunnel, a quick glance at a figure like that could easily become distorted in the details. The beard and hair could pass for fur, or a coat pulled tight could look like a single mass of color. It also explains how the creature was able to speak. The tunnels echo, so a voice sounded distorted as well, especially in a moment of panic. And like all the other stories where something strange and unusual creeps up, aliens have also been a part of the conversation. And in the 1970s, UFO stories were everywhere. There had been sightings in Sudbury in 1975, with newspapers running pieces on the lights in the sky and radio hosts taking calls from listeners who swore they saw something unusual on a back road. Both aliens of the time and the creature were described as gray. The height also fits the stereotypical alien portrayal. Toronto had its own share of UFO reports during that decade as well. Residents in Scarborough and Etobicoke called in sightings. There were even a few that were investigated by local police. There was also another angle, one that didn't come from pop culture or anything seen on the news. It came from stories that had been a part of the land long before Toronto became the city it is now. The Anishinaabe had beings connected to the rivers and the rocky stretches around the Great Lakes. The Mimekwasi. Stories about these little people were passed down through generations, and the details changed depending on who you're hearing them from. They were often described as small, almost childlike, and covered with hair, with a voice that didn't sound quite human, very squeaky and raspy. Some families talked about them carving marks into stones or shaping tiny canoes from rocks. Others said that they were formed from tree bark long ago, and the name itself has different roots as well. One comes from the Ojibwe word memi, meaning hair. Another is tied to Mimekwasi, the word for butterfly, because some of the stories describe them as moving quickly, almost like the soft flickering of air. There is another figure in Ojibwe stories too, like the Mimigwans. They aren't described the same way as the Mimekwasi. They show up when a child was hurt or scared or alone, and they are approached in a way that makes a child feel less overwhelmed. Adults didn't react well when they saw one, and the stories about those encounters were intense. These creatures were often tied to copper, and people prayed to them when a younger person went missing near the mines. The details were specific, and the way that they were talked about set them apart from the shorter, hair-covered figures in other stories. The Métis families had their own stories about small beings as well. Those stories blended Algonquin traditions with Western European trails, and the mix created a wide range of characters.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
Some were described the way people in Scotland talk about brownies, or how families in northern England talk about hopes. Others were tied to the land in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Métis parents told their kids that the little people lived near the riverbanks and in sandhills by the lakes or under the rock formations. They were connected to the pictographs along the Cambrian Shield, and people left sugar, candies, and tobacco for them. If something shiny went missing from a house, someone in the family would joke that the little people had taken it. And if someone camping near the shoreline heard a movement underground at night, that was a part of the story too. By the time the 1970s rolled around, Toronto had families from all over Canada, including Métis, Anishinaabe, and other First Nation communities, who all brought their own traditions into neighborhoods like Regent Park, St. Jamestown, and Cabbagetown. So, when somebody around this time started talking about a small figure in a tunnel under Parliament Street, the conversation didn't stay limited to escaped pets or someone living underground. In a city with ravines, riverbanks, and old service corridors running beneath the streets, it wasn't surprising that these older stories started to surface as well. Cryptozoology fans have added their own layer to that conversation. They point out that Toronto's waterways didn't disappear. They were redirected and buried. Garrison Creek, Tattle Creek, and several smaller stream systems still run underneath the city in engineered channels. To them, the idea wasn't that the creature Ernest described was some undiscovered animal. They leaned towards the possibility that the tunnels crossed paths with places that tied to the older stories. This brought up the native little people again, noting that many descriptions mentioned small, hairless beings that stayed close to waters and caves, with a voice that didn't sound quite right. And since many Toronto rivers have now moved through underground routes, some of the people wondered if Ernest had walked into a space connected to those older waterways. The size he described, the fur, the voice, none of it clashed with the way the Mimisikwe were talked about. And that was enough for some people to suggest that what he saw wasn't an animal or a person at all, but something tied to the stories that had been there long before the city. Most of the people who work down there have stories about something that's caught them off guard. A shape at the end of a corridor that turned out to be a pile of equipment. A voice that carried strangely from a connecting shaft. A figure that they thought was a co-worker until they got close enough to realize that they were alone. And when the Cabbagetown story came up, a few of them had their own opinions about that too. One sewer worker heard the details, didn't think that the passage Ernest described was a part of the main system at all. He figured the ground underneath that section of concrete had washed out over time, creating a pocket that looked like a tunnel, but didn't actually connect to anything. Without access to that exact spot, there was no way to check how far it went or what it might have opened up into. But he didn't think that it was tied to the city's active network. Others have focused less on the layout and more on the experience of being underground. One worker put it simply, people on the surface don't understand what it's like down there. The lighting, the acoustics, the way your eyes adjust, it all changes how you interpret what you're seeing. He didn't try to guess what Ernest had run into, but he made it very clear that he wouldn't want to be down there alone, ever. Listening to them, it's pretty easy to understand how someone in 1978 could end up in a tunnel under Cabbagetown and see something they couldn't explain. The system wasn't built all at once. It grew in pieces as the city expanded, and every decade added new corridors, new access points, and new blind spots. That patchwork created places where shadows bend, voices travel strangely, and a quick glimpse of movement can look like something entirely different. The people who work down there, when you listen to them, you really start to get a sense of how complicated the underground really is. And that's where the history of these tunnels becomes just as interesting as the stories tied to them. Toronto didn't build one clear, organized system. It grew in layers, and every project left something behind. That's why the city has moments in its past where workers stumble onto things no one expected. Back in 1908, crews dug a tunnel near the harbor, and they pulled up a slab of hardened clay with what looked like a human footprint pressed into it. The impressions were old enough that some people thought they might be looking at evidence of some of the earliest activity around Lake Ontario. Someone on site sketched it before the slab was tossed aside so the crew could keep working. They were on a deadline, and no one stopped the project to figure out what they had found. Stories like that are a part of why people still wonder what else might be sitting in those old sections of the system. Urban explorers slip into the tunnels every year looking for anything unusual. They don't talk much about what they find, mostly because they're not supposed to be down there in the first place. But a few who do share their experiences talk about pockets of space that don't show up on the maps, old chambers that have been cut off from main work, and stretches of tunnel that feel untouched for decades. Some of them think that they're walking past artifacts that were never collected. Others think that they've crossed paths with something alive, even if they couldn't get a clear look at it. It's easy to see why people still talk about what might be hiding under the city. Toronto's underground has been changing for more than a century, and every new project built over something older. With that kind of history, the idea of someone running into something unexpected down there doesn't feel so far-fetched at all. Actually, all of this sounds pretty familiar. Tons of other cryptid stories have taken shape in similar ways. Cryptid is a word that gets spoken often in strange creature cases such as this, when a person is met with a creature that has no confirmed scientific record. Some of them are tied to specific regions, like reports that come out of the Appalachians about tall human-shaped figures near old mining sites. Others become national obsessions, like the 1960s and 70s, when Bigfoot sightings were getting airtime on TV, and magazines were running stories about lake monsters and strange animals turning up in places no one expected. That era shaped the way people reacted to anything unusual. If someone said they saw a creature that didn't match the wildlife in the area, there were already groups of people ready to collect the stories, compare them to older sightings, and look for patterns, trying to make sense of it. As for Goldstein, he kept his word and never revealed who Ernest really was. After that first interview, he never heard from him again either. The tunnel Ernest described has long since been sealed off, and most people think that the entrance probably collapsed during a winter freeze. Whatever was down there, no one's been able to check exactly that spot since. Even so, Goldstein still gets messages about the article. People reach out with their own theories, their own stories, or just to ask if he's learned anything new. And after everything he covered in his career, he still says that the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster was the strangest piece that he ever wrote.